ladies and gentlemen. We live in a world where paradoxically we are more connected than ever before, but more isolated than we've ever been. The story of a lonely man, a man without friends or family, is not just the tale of one person. It is the shadow looming over every human life, a possibility that reveals the fragile nature of our social bonds. And it is this fragile nature that makes those bonds so profoundly important. Human beings are social creatures. We are not made to live in solitude. We are not built to endure the harsh silence of isolation. The lonely man struggles not only because he lacks companionship, but because he is severed from the web of meaning that relationships provide. Friendships and family do more than keep us company. They give us a reason to get out of bed, a sense that we matter to someone beyond ourselves. But what happens when those bonds are broken or never formed? The lonely man without friend or family becomes untethered. He drifts through life lost in his own thoughts, wrestling with questions that only deepen the void. Am I enough? Do I matter? And most hauntingly, what's the point of all this loneliness? Doesn't merely hurt, it eats away at the soul. Our culture often praises the ideal of self-sufficiency, as though a life lived alone is a sign of strength. But this is a dangerous illusion. True strength lies not in shutting others out, but in allowing them in forging connections, in building bridges, in admitting that we need each other. Independence is valuable, yes, but interdependence is what allows us to thrive. And yet, the lonely man isn't merely a victim of his circumstances. Loneliness invites a question: what will you do now? It is tempting to retreat further into the shadows, to let despair tighten its grip. But there is another path, a path of courage, of humility, of reaching out even when it feels impossible. It begins with small steps: a conversation with a stranger, a phone call to an old acquaintance, a gesture of kindness to someone in need. These actions, though they may feel insignificant, have the power to plant the seeds of connection. And in time, those seeds grow into the bonds that bring meaning and purpose back to life. Now, let me be clear, there is value in solitude. Solitude can be a teacher, a space where you confront yourself and discover the depth of your own being. But solitude must be a place you visit, not a prison you live in. The goal is not to escape loneliness by withdrawing further, but to use those quiet moments to build the strength needed to rejoin the world. So I ask you to reflect. Are you the lonely man, or do you know someone who is? Either way, the answer is the same: take responsibility. If you are the lonely man, take one step today, no matter how small, toward connection. If you know someone who is lost in that wilderness of isolation, be the hand that pulls them back to the light. Because no man is truly alone unless the world decides to forget him, and no man is forgotten if even one person decides to care. That is the power of human connection, and it is a power each of us holds. Loneliness is one of the most profound and universal experiences of human existence, a condition that transcends age, culture, and background. It is not merely the absence of company or the physical state of being alone. Instead, it is a deeper, more unsettling feeling: the realization that no one truly sees you, hears you, or shares in your world. Loneliness speaks to the core of what it means to be human, because we are inherently relational creatures. From the moment we are born, our survival depends on others. We learn to walk, to talk, to think, and to feel through our interactions with those around us. Our very sense of self emerges from the mirror of relationships. To be lonely, then, is to feel cut off not just from people, but from meaning itself. At its heart, loneliness is the absence of connection, and connection is more than physical presence. It is the experience of being understood and valued, a feeling that you matter to someone else. Without this connection, a person begins to drift. The world feels less vibrant, less real, as though the colors have faded from view. A lonely person may sit in a crowded room yet feel as if they are invisible, as if their presence makes no difference to those around them. This is the torment of loneliness. It isolates not just externally, but internally, convincing you that your worth is diminished because no one chooses to share their life with you. This condition has a profound impact on the mind and body. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness can lead to anxiety, depression, and a decline in cognitive function. The brain begins to interpret the world as hostile or indifferent, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of withdrawal and despair. Physically, loneliness has been linked to a weakened immune system, higher blood pressure, and even a shorter lifespan. It is as though the absence of connection slowly erodes a person from within, highlighting how deeply ingrained our need for others truly is. Yet loneliness is not just a personal experience, it is a mirror reflecting broader societal issues. We live in a time of unprecedented individualism, where self-reliance is often celebrated as the ultimate virtue. Social media gives the illusion of connection, yet many find themselves scrolling endlessly through curated images and hollow interactions, feeling more isolated than ever. The pace of modern life, the fragmentation of communities, and the prioritization of achievement over relationships have all contributed to a culture where loneliness thrives. What makes loneliness so insidious is how it attacks the very mechanisms needed to escape it. A lonely person often feels unworthy of connection, and this belief can lead to behaviors that push others further away. The fear of rejection becomes paralyzing. Efforts to reach out, to make new connections or rekindle old ones, can feel unbearably risky, as if each failed attempt confirms the lonely person's deepest fears about their own inadequacy. And so the cycle continues, with the walls growing higher and thicker around the lonely soul. But why does loneliness strike so deeply at the heart of our existence? It is because at our core, we are not just individuals, we are part of something larger. Our ancestors survived not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they relied on each other. Cooperation, communication, and care were the foundations of human progress. To be cut off from others, then, is to feel untethered from our evolutionary roots. It is to lose not just companionship, but also a sense of belonging, a sense of place in the grand tapestry of life. Loneliness forces us to confront questions that are both terrifying and essential. Who am I without others? What is my value if no one sees me? These questions cut to the very heart of what it means to be alive. They expose our vulnerabilities, our fears, and our longing for connection. And yet, they also point to a profound truth: the significance of our relationships is not merely incidental, it is foundational. The lonely man is not just a man without friends or family, he is a man without mirrors to reflect his own humanity back to him. Friendships and family are not just luxuries or optional parts of life, they are the bedrock upon which a meaningful existence is built. They shape who we are, provide us with a sense of identity, and remind us that we are part of something larger than ourselves. To have someone you can call a friend, or to belong to a family, even a flawed one, is to have a foundation that anchors you in the world. It gives you a place to return to when life becomes overwhelming and a reason to press forward when challenges seem insurmountable. The absence of these connections leaves an emptiness that no amount of material success, individual achievement, or personal ambition can truly fill. At its core, a relationship is more than shared experiences or time spent together. It is a dynamic exchange, a place where your story intertwines with someone else's. Friendships, for instance, provide a unique space where we are free to be ourselves without judgment. A true friend sees you for who you are, accepts you in your moments of weakness, and celebrates your victories as if they were their own. They remind you that you are not alone, that your struggles are seen and your triumphs are valued. Through friendship, we learn the language of trust, loyalty, and compassion, qualities that not only strengthen the bond but also enrich our character. Family, too, plays a role that is fundamental and irreplaceable. Whether it is the family we are born into or the one we create, these relationships root us in a history that stretches beyond ourselves. Family reminds us that we are part of a lineage, a continuation of something older and deeper. It shapes our understanding of where we come from and, often, where we are going. While no family is perfect indeed, many are fraught with conflict and difficulty. The ties that bind us to those we call family often carry a sense of unconditional belonging. Even in strained relationships, there is an underlying recognition of connection, a shared history that links people together in ways that transcend words. The significance of these bonds becomes especially clear in moments of crisis. When life takes an unexpected turn, when you lose your job, face a serious illness, or endure a personal failure, those who stand by you remind you of your inherent worth. They are the ones who reassure you that, even when the world feels cold and indifferent, there are people who care. Friendships and family act as a buffer against the harshness of life, providing both practical support and emotional strength. Without these relationships, navigating life's inevitable hardships can feel like an impossible burden, as though you are facing the weight of the world entirely on your own. Beyond their role in helping us weather life's storms, friendships and family also give us a sense of purpose. A fulfilling life is not measured solely by individual accomplishments, but by the impact we have on others. To be a good friend or a devoted family member requires effort. It asks that we show up, listen, give, and sometimes sacrifice. Yet, in doing so, we find a deeper sense of fulfillment than we ever could in pursuing self-interest alone. In caring for others, we discover meaning. In being there for someone else, we learn that our lives matter in ways that extend beyond ourselves. The absence of these connections, by contrast, leaves a void that is difficult to articulate but unmistakable in its weight. A man without friends or family is not just lonely, he is untethered. He lacks the mirrors that reflect his value back to him, the voices that remind him of his potential, and the presence of others who affirm his place in the world. Isolation is not merely an emotional state, it is a loss of context, a sense of being adrift without the anchors that relationships provide. This absence creates a kind of existential drift, where a person begins to question their purpose and their place in the broader human story. Yet, the beauty of relationships lies in their reciprocity. The love and care we give to others often come back to us in ways we cannot predict. A simple conversation with a friend, a shared memory with a sibling, or a kind gesture from a parent can remind us of the profound interconnectedness of human life. These moments may seem small, but they form the threads of a rich, meaningful existence. Relationships are not just what we turn to in times of need, they are what make life worth living in the first place. The consequences of isolation run deep, impacting the human mind, body, and soul in ways that are both visible and unseen. Loneliness is not simply a temporary feeling of sadness or longing. When it persists, it becomes something much more damaging. It quietly infiltrates every part of a person's life, altering how they see themselves, how they relate to the world, and even how their body functions. Isolation is not just an emotional or psychological state, it is an affliction that touches every dimension of human existence, often with devastating results. Psychologically, prolonged loneliness can distort the way a person perceives themselves and the world around them. The mind of an isolated individual often becomes trapped in a cycle of negative self-reflection. Thoughts of unworthiness and inadequacy creep in, whispering the insidious lie that they are alone because they deserve to be. Over time, these thoughts can solidify into deeply ingrained beliefs, making it even harder for someone to reach out for connection. A lonely person begins to interpret social interactions through a lens of fear and mistrust, assuming rejection before it even happens. This can lead to avoidance of others altogether, reinforcing the very isolation they so desperately want to escape. Emotionally, loneliness takes a heavy toll. It fosters feelings of emptiness, despair, and hopelessness that can become overwhelming. The absence of meaningful relationships deprives people of the emotional validation that comes from being seen and understood by others. Without this, the world begins to feel indifferent, as though nothing truly matters. Over time, this emotional void can give way to depression, a condition that saps motivation, energy, and the will to engage with life. The longer the isolation lasts, the more entrenched these feelings become, creating a vicious cycle that is increasingly difficult to break. The impact of loneliness does not stop at the mind, it extends to the body in ways that are both surprising and alarming. Studies have consistently shown that chronic loneliness can have the same health risks as smoking, obesity, or a sedentary lifestyle. Isolation triggers a stress response in the body, releasing hormones like cortisol that, over time, wreak havoc on physical health. Immune systems weaken, making lonely individuals more susceptible to illness. Blood pressure rises, increasing the risk of heart disease and stroke. Sleep is disrupted, further impairing physical and mental health. The physical body, it seems, reflects the inner turmoil of isolation, breaking down under the weight of sustained disconnection. Socially, the consequences of isolation ripple outward, affecting not only the individual but also the broader community. A lonely person often withdraws, either consciously or unconsciously, from social networks, leaving gaps that others may not even realize exist. These absences weaken the social fabric, which depends on mutual engagement and connection to thrive. When individuals retreat into isolation, opportunities for shared experiences, collaboration, and mutual support diminish. Loneliness, in this way, is not just a personal problem, it is a societal one. A community where loneliness is widespread is a fragmented community, one that struggles to foster unity, cooperation, and collective well-being. Perhaps most tragically, loneliness deprives individuals of the very experiences that give life meaning. To share a laugh, to confide in someone you trust, to celebrate milestones or grieve losses with others, these are the moments that make us feel alive. Isolation robs people of these moments, leaving them to carry the burdens of life alone. Without relationships, joys are muted, sorrows are magnified, and the sense of purpose that comes from being connected to others is lost. Loneliness does not simply leave a person feeling empty, it deprives them of the richness and texture that make life worth living. Isolation also distorts time itself. Days blend into one another, marked not by shared experiences or meaningful interactions, but by the monotony of solitude. This lack of structure can make time feel both endless and fleeting, amplifying feelings of disconnection. A lonely individual may lose touch with the rhythms of life that are so often dictated by relationships, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and other shared milestones. In their absence, life begins to feel stagnant, as though it is happening in a vacuum, detached from the flow of the wider world. What makes the consequences of loneliness so particularly devastating is the way it undermines hope. When someone is isolated for long periods, they begin to believe that their situation is permanent, that no one cares, and that no effort to change things will make a difference. This hopelessness becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as the fear of rejection or failure prevents them from taking the steps needed to reconnect with others. Over time, this sense of futility can deepen into despair, making it increasingly difficult for a person to imagine a way out. The pain of isolation is not just the absence of others, it is the absence of self that occurs when you have no one to reflect your existence back to you. Loneliness leaves a person feeling untethered, as though they are drifting in a sea with no anchor, no compass, and no shore in sight. And as this drift continues, the consequences compound, leaving scars that are not easily healed. The idea of self-sufficiency has become a celebrated ideal in modern society. We are told that independence is the ultimate achievement, that to rely on others is a sign of weakness, and that true success is found in standing alone. It is a narrative that promises strength and empowerment, but often leads to something far less fulfilling. The lonely man without friends or family becomes the stark embodiment of this illusion. While he may appear to be self-reliant, his isolation reveals the emptiness that comes with the belief that one can or should navigate life entirely on their own. At its heart, the illusion of self-sufficiency is rooted in a misunderstanding of what it means to be strong. Strength is often mischaracterized as the absence of need, as the ability to endure hardship without leaning on others. But true strength is not found in isolation, it is found in connection. To admit that you need others, to be vulnerable enough to let them into your life, is one of the most courageous things a person can do. It takes far more bravery to reach out for help, to risk rejection, and to invest in relationships than it does to build walls around yourself and declare that you are fine on your own. Yet, the culture of individualism continues to push people toward isolation under the guise of self-reliance. From an early age, we are taught to value personal achievements over collective efforts, to focus on building careers and accomplishments rather than nurturing relationships. Social media reinforces this narrative, bombarding us with images of people who seem to have it all figured out, who appear to be thriving without the need for anyone else. It creates a distorted picture of what fulfillment looks like, one that places self-sufficiency on a pedestal while neglecting the fundamental human need for connection. The danger of this illusion becomes evident when we consider what happens to those who embrace it. The lonely man who clings to self-sufficiency may convince himself that he doesn't need others, that he is better off without the complications and disappointments that relationships often bring. But this mindset is not liberating, it is imprisoning. By shutting others out, he deprives himself of the richness that comes from shared experiences, mutual support, and emotional intimacy. He becomes trapped in a bubble of his own making, one where he may feel protected, but where he is also profoundly disconnected. The human brain is wired for connection. Our need for others is not a weakness, it is a biological reality. From the time we are born, we depend on others not only for survival, but for our emotional and psychological development. Relationships teach us how to communicate, how to empathize, and how to navigate the complexities of life. When we isolate ourselves in the name of self-sufficiency, we cut ourselves off from these essential lessons. Over time, this can lead to a kind of atrophy, a loss of the social and emotional skills that make us fully human. Even those who succeed in achieving material independence, those who have wealth, status, or professional accomplishments, often find that these things feel hollow without meaningful relationships. The lonely man may have all the external markers of success, but if he has no one to share his life with, his achievements lose their significance. A promotion, a new house, a personal milestone, these moments mean little when there is no one to celebrate them with. The illusion of self-sufficiency promises fulfillment, but it delivers a life that is often devoid of the joy and meaning that come from connection. What makes the pursuit of self-sufficiency so tragic is that it often leads people to reject the very thing they need most. The lonely man, convinced that he must stand alone, may push away opportunities for connection out of fear that they will make him vulnerable. He may interpret dependence as weakness and see relationships as distractions from his pursuit of independence. But this perspective misses the fundamental truth that relationships do not diminish us, they complete us. To rely on others is not to be weak, it is to embrace the reality that we are, at our core, relational beings. The pursuit of self-sufficiency often leads to a life of quiet despair, where the walls built to keep others out also keep out joy, love, and meaning. The lonely man may tell himself that he is strong, that he is free, but deep down he feels the weight of his isolation. He may long for connection but not know how to reach for it. He may yearn for intimacy but fear the vulnerability it requires, and so he remains trapped, clinging to the illusion of self-sufficiency even as it drains him of life. The truth is that no one is truly self-sufficient. Even the most independent person is shaped by the relationships they have had, the communities they belong to, and the society they live in. To embrace this reality is not to surrender strength, but to find it. It is to recognize that connection is not a weakness, but a source of resilience, that reliance on others does not diminish us, but makes us whole. The lonely man, if he can see through the illusion of self-sufficiency, has the potential to rediscover this truth. And in doing so, he can begin to rebuild the connections that give life its meaning and depth. The absence of meaningful connections doesn't just create a void in one's emotional life, it leaves a person unmoored, adrift without purpose or direction. Relationships, whether with friends, family, or a community, serve as the threads that weave together a life of meaning. They provide structure, responsibility, and, most importantly, a sense of belonging. Without them, a man is left in a state of existential drift, grappling with questions about his value, his role, and why he should even bother to continue. This is not simply a philosophical dilemma, but a lived reality for those who lack the relationships that tether them to the world. Human beings are not designed to exist in isolation. From the moment we are born, our lives are oriented toward connection. Infants cry out for their caregivers, not just for nourishment, but for comfort and security. Children learn about themselves and the world through interaction with others. Even as adults, we define much of our identity through the roles we play in the lives of those around us, whether as a parent, sibling, friend, or partner. These roles give us a sense of purpose and reinforce our sense of belonging. When these connections are absent, it can feel as though life itself has lost its framework. A man without friends or family is denied the opportunity to experience the joy and responsibility of being needed. Relationships are not just about receiving support, but also about giving it. To be a friend or a family member is to have someone depend on you, to know that your presence in their life makes a difference. This mutual dependence is not a burden, but a gift, offering a sense of purpose that is deeply fulfilling. Without it, life can feel empty, as though nothing you do truly matters. You wake up in the morning without a clear reason, go through your day without anyone to share it with, and end the evening with a silence that echoes your sense of isolation. The absence of connection also deprives a person of the motivation that relationships naturally provide. When you care about others, their well-being becomes intertwined with your own. You strive to be better, not just for yourself, but for the people you care about. A parent pushes forward through adversity for the sake of their child. A friend offers encouragement that helps you pursue goals you might otherwise abandon. These relationships inspire us to rise above our limitations and to find strength we didn't know we had. In their absence, the motivation to improve, to grow, and to achieve can wither away. Life becomes a series of repetitive tasks rather than a journey towards something greater. Moreover, the absence of meaningful relationships makes it difficult to feel a sense of legacy or continuity. When you are connected to others, your life extends beyond the boundaries of your own existence. A family allows you to pass down values, traditions, and stories, creating a sense of connection to the past and the future. Friendships provide memories that will live on in the minds of others, even after you are gone. But for the man without friends or family, life can feel as though it ends at the edge of his own experiences. There is no one to carry his story forward, no sense that he is part of something larger than himself. This absence also limits the ability to find meaning in shared human experiences. Joy is magnified when it is shared, sorrow is lessened when others help you bear it. Celebrations, milestones, and even the simple pleasures of life are enriched by the presence of others. Without friends or family, even the most significant achievements can feel hollow. You can climb a mountain, But if there's no one at the summit with you, the view is not the same. You can overcome immense struggles, but without someone to share your triumph, the victory feels incomplete. Life's greatest moments are meant to be experienced with others, and without them, the meaning of those moments is diminished. Loneliness also has a way of turning inward, leading to a heightened sense of self-focus that can be both isolating and exhausting. In the absence of others, a man may find himself constantly ruminating, trapped in his own thoughts. There is no external perspective to challenge his assumptions or to provide relief from the relentless self-examination that often accompanies isolation. Relationships offer a way out of this inward spiral. They provide a mirror through which we see ourselves more clearly, offering insights that we cannot find on our own. Without them, it is easy to become lost in a maze of doubts, fears, and insecurities. Perhaps most devastatingly, the absence of relationships strips away the sense of being known. To be understood by someone else is one of the most profound experiences a person can have. It affirms that your life has been witnessed, that your struggles and joys have mattered to someone else. Without this, it can feel as though you are invisible, as though your existence lacks significance. This is not just a feeling of being lonely, it is a feeling of being erased, of fading into the background of life without anyone to notice or care. For the man without meaningful connections, life can feel like a series of unanswered questions. Why am I here? What is the point of my efforts? Who will remember me when I'm gone? These are questions that relationships help us answer, not through words, but through the lived experience of being part of something greater. Without friends or family, the search for meaning becomes an uphill battle, one fought without the very tools that make the struggle worthwhile. The absence of relationships is not just a loss of companionship, it is a loss of the grounding forces that make life purposeful and fulfilling. Vulnerability is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human existence. Often, it is seen as a weakness, a crack in the armor we wear to protect ourselves from the unpredictable nature of life and relationships. Yet vulnerability is not a sign of fragility, it is the foundation upon which true connection is built. For the man who isolates himself, whether consciously or unconsciously, his reluctance to embrace vulnerability becomes his prison. He may believe he is shielding himself from pain, rejection, or disappointment, but in doing so, he also walls himself off from the beauty, warmth, and intimacy that make life meaningful. To live without vulnerability is to live without authentic connection, and the cost of that is immeasurable. Vulnerability is the gateway to trust. When we share our fears, our struggles, or even our dreams with another person, we are taking a risk. We are exposing a part of ourselves that could be judged, dismissed, or rejected. But it is in this act of exposure that trust is formed. When someone listens to us without judgment, when they accept us despite our flaws, we feel seen and valued. This exchange creates a bond that is unshakable because it is rooted in authenticity. Without vulnerability, such bonds cannot form. The man who hides his true self, who masks his fears or pretends he needs no one, deprives himself of the opportunity to build the trust that only comes from being open and real with others. At its core, vulnerability is an act of courage. It is not easy to admit that we are imperfect, that we have needs, or that we sometimes feel lost. It requires strength to let down our guard and invite others into the messy, complicated realities of our lives. But this courage is essential if we are to form genuine relationships. Surface-level interactions, where everyone maintains a facade of invincibility, cannot sustain the deep connections that bring lasting fulfillment. True relationships demand that we step into the discomfort of vulnerability, trusting that the risk is worth the reward. For the man who isolates himself, the fear of vulnerability often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He may tell himself that others cannot be trusted, that opening up will only lead to betrayal or hurt. This belief becomes a barrier, preventing him from taking the first step toward connection. But what he fails to see is that vulnerability, while risky, also has the power to draw people closer. When someone is willing to share their struggles or admit their fears, it creates a space for others to do the same. Vulnerability is contagious, it invites reciprocity. By avoiding it, the isolated man closes the door to the very relationships he longs for. The irony is that by trying to protect himself from emotional pain, the man who resists vulnerability often ends up suffering even more. Loneliness, isolation, and the deep anxiety of being unseen are far more damaging than the temporary sting of rejection or the discomfort of sharing one's feelings. Vulnerability is not what breaks us, it is what allows us to heal. In moments of openness, we discover that we are not alone in our struggles. Others, too, have felt the same doubts, fears, and longings. This shared humanity is what binds us together, reminding us that, no matter how difficult life may seem, we are never truly alone. Moreover, vulnerability is not just about sharing pain, it is also about sharing joy. To be vulnerable is to admit that we care, that we are invested, and that something matters to us. It is about showing enthusiasm, love, and hope, even when there is a chance those feelings may not be reciprocated. This openness is what allows us to experience the full depth of life's joys. A life without vulnerability may seem safe, but it is also a life devoid of passion, excitement, and the deep satisfaction that comes from loving and being loved. The fear of vulnerability often stems from a misunderstanding of its purpose. Vulnerability is not about being weak or dependent, it is about being real. It is about acknowledging that we are human, that we have limits, and that we cannot navigate life alone. When we embrace vulnerability, we allow others to see us for who we truly are, and in doing so, we create the conditions for genuine connection. The isolated man, trapped by his fear of being exposed, misses out on this fundamental truth. He may believe he is protecting himself, but he is, in fact, denying himself the very experiences that make life rich and meaningful. In relationships, vulnerability acts as a bridge. It spans the gap between two people, allowing them to meet in a place of understanding and empathy. Without this bridge, there can be no true closeness. The man who avoids vulnerability may convince himself that he is self-sufficient, that he needs no one else to validate his existence. But deep down, the absence of connection leaves a void that cannot be ignored. His isolation becomes a barrier not only to others but to himself, preventing him from experiencing the emotional depth and fulfillment that come from truly opening up. To embrace vulnerability is to embrace life itself. It is an acknowledgement that we are not perfect, that we will face rejection and disappointment, but that these experiences are part of what it means to be human. By avoiding vulnerability, we may avoid some pain, but we also forfeit the chance to experience love, joy, and connection in their truest forms. The lonely man, if he can find the courage to embrace vulnerability, holds the key to breaking free from his isolation. In letting down his guard, he opens the door to relationships that can transform his life, reminding him of the profound beauty and meaning that come from being seen, understood, and loved. The absence of relationships and the resulting loneliness do not exist in a vacuum, they ripple outward, impacting every facet of a person's life. For the man without friends or family, isolation begins to affect not just his emotional well-being, but also his physical health, his cognitive abilities, and his capacity to navigate life effectively. These impacts are not minor or hypothetical, they are profound and often backed by science, demonstrating that loneliness and isolation are as damaging to a person's health and longevity as smoking or obesity. The lonely man may believe he can endure his solitude, that he is immune to its effects, but over time the cumulative toll becomes impossible to ignore. One of the most immediate ways loneliness manifests is through chronic stress. Humans are inherently social creatures, evolved to thrive in groups where mutual support provides protection and reassurance. When we are isolated, our bodies perceive this as a state of danger. Without the calming presence of others, the stress response is heightened, leading to increased levels of cortisol, the hormone responsible for managing stress. Over time, elevated cortisol levels can wreak havoc on the body, contributing to issues such as high blood pressure, weakened immunity, and inflammation. The lonely man, even if he outwardly appears calm or stoic, is likely carrying an internal burden of stress that silently erodes his health. Beyond stress, the absence of social bonds has a significant impact on cardiovascular health. Studies have shown that people who are socially isolated are at greater risk of heart disease and stroke. The mechanisms behind this are multifaceted but often linked to the same stress responses and inflammatory processes triggered by loneliness. When someone is surrounded by a supportive network, they are more likely to engage in behaviors that protect their heart, such as staying active, eating healthily, and seeking medical care when needed. The lonely man, lacking this support, may neglect these aspects of his health, compounding his vulnerability to physical ailments. Mental health also bears the brunt of isolation. Loneliness is not merely an emotional state, it is a deeply damaging psychological experience that can lead to conditions like depression and anxiety. Without friends or family to turn to, the lonely man has no outlet for expressing his struggles or finding relief from his worries. This lack of emotional release can cause negative thoughts to spiral, making it harder to break free from the grip of despair. Depression, in particular, thrives in the fertile ground of isolation. feeding off the absence of connection and the sense of purposelessness that often accompanies it. The man's mind becomes a prison, trapping him in patterns of rumination that only deepen his feelings of hopelessness. Cognitive decline is another consequence of prolonged isolation. Engaging with others is not just socially rewarding, it is mentally stimulating. Conversations, shared activities, and the exchange of ideas all serve to keep the brain active and engaged. For the man who isolates himself, this mental stimulation is absent, leaving his mind to atrophy over time. Research has shown that people who are socially isolated are at a higher risk of developing dementia and other cognitive impairments. The lonely man, by withdrawing from relationships, unwittingly accelerates the very mental decline that he may fear as he ages. The absence of relationships also diminishes resilience, the ability to cope with life's inevitable challenges. When we face adversity, having a support system can make all the difference. Friends and family provide not only practical assistance, but also emotional encouragement, reminding us that we are not alone in our struggles. For the man without these connections, every challenge becomes exponentially harder. Without someone to lean on, setbacks feel more overwhelming, and the motivation to persevere can wane. Over time, this lack of resilience can lead to a sense of defeat, making it harder to find the energy to rebuild or move forward. Even the act of self-care becomes more challenging in isolation. Relationships serve as a mirror, reflecting back to us our worth and reminding us to take care of ourselves. A loved one may encourage us to visit the doctor, eat a nutritious meal, or rest when we are overworked. For the lonely man, these reminders are absent. Without someone to express concern for his well-being, he may neglect his health, both physical and mental. Small lapses in self-care accumulate over time, leading to larger issues that could have been prevented with the gentle nudges that come from being connected to others. Loneliness also has a way of reinforcing itself, creating a vicious cycle that is difficult to break. The longer a person remains isolated, the harder it becomes to re-enter the social world. The lonely man may begin to internalize his isolation, believing that he is unworthy of connection, or that his solitude is a reflection of some personal failing. This self-perception can make him hesitant to reach out to others, even when opportunities for connection arise. Over time, he becomes increasingly entrenched in his loneliness, not because others are unwilling to connect, but because he has lost the confidence or the belief that connection is possible. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this cycle is the way it affects the man's sense of identity. Relationships help define who we are. They shape our values, our aspirations, and our sense of belonging in the world. Without friends or family, the lonely man lacks this grounding influence. He may begin to question his purpose, his worth, and even his very existence. This existential void is not something that can be filled by material success or solitary achievements. It is a wound that only connection can heal. The man who believes he can endure his loneliness without consequence is, in many ways, deceiving himself. Isolation may seem manageable in the short term, but its long-term effects are insidious and far-reaching. It is not just a matter of feeling lonely, it is a matter of being unwell, both physically and mentally. The cost of isolation is not just the absence of companionship, it is the erosion of health, the decline of resilience, and the loss of life's vibrancy. The lonely man, if he continues down this path, will find that the toll of isolation is far greater than he ever imagined, touching every aspect of his existence and leaving him diminished in ways he may not fully realize until it is too late. A life devoid of relationships is not only a solitary existence, but also one that denies an individual the profound sense of legacy and belonging that comes from being part of something larger than themselves. Human beings are fundamentally wired to be part of a collective story, a broader narrative that transcends their own individual experiences. This connection is often found through family ties, friendships, or participation in communities. Without these bonds, a person becomes untethered, drifting in a world where their actions, achievements, and even their very existence can feel insignificant. For the man without friends or family, this lack of connection to a larger whole can erode his sense of purpose and leave him grappling with the weight of existential isolation. Legacy is not just about leaving behind material possessions or accolades, it is about the imprint we leave on the lives of others. Relationships are the conduits through which this legacy flows. A parent passes down values, wisdom, and traditions to their children. A mentor inspires and guides the next generation. Friends hold memories that preserve who we were long after we are gone. These connections create a ripple effect, ensuring that our lives continue to matter even after we are no longer physically present. For the man who isolates himself, this opportunity to contribute to something enduring is lost. Without relationships, his actions may feel as though they begin and end with himself, leaving no lasting mark on the world. Belonging, too, is an essential part of the human experience. It is not merely about being part of a group, but about feeling understood, valued, and accepted. This sense of belonging gives life context. It anchors us in a web of relationships that provide meaning and direction. It reminds us that we are not alone, that our joys and struggles are shared, and that we are part of a larger human story. Without friends or family, the lonely man is denied this sense of belonging. He may move through life as an observer rather than a participant, watching from the sidelines as others build connections, share milestones, and support one another. This detachment can lead to a profound sense of alienation, as though he exists outside the bounds of human connection. The absence of relationships also deprives a person of the opportunity to find meaning through service to others. One of the most fulfilling aspects of life is the ability to make a positive impact on those around us. Whether it's through offering support in times of need, celebrating someone else's success, or simply being present for someone, these acts of service deepen our sense of purpose. They remind us that our lives are intertwined with those of others, and that our actions have significance. For the man without relationships, this avenue for meaning is closed off. His solitude leaves him with no one to serve, no one to care for, and no one to share in the mutual exchange of giving and receiving that makes life so rich. Time, too, takes on a different dimension in the absence of relationships. When we are connected to others, we experience time not just as a linear progression, but as a series of shared moments that build upon one another. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays mark the passage of time in a way that is meaningful because they are shared. These moments create a sense of continuity, linking the past, present, and future. For the lonely man, time can feel stagnant and unstructured. Without the shared milestones that relationships provide, days blur into one another, and the years pass without the markers that give life a sense of rhythm and purpose. The absence of relationships also limits the ability to find solace in times of hardship. Life is inevitably filled with challenges, losses, and uncertainties. In these moments, relationships act as a source of strength, providing comfort, perspective, and encouragement. A supportive friend or family member can remind us of our resilience, helping us navigate the storms of life. For the man without these connections, hardships are faced alone, magnifying their weight and making them harder to bear. The lack of support not only deepens his struggles, but also reinforces the sense of isolation that pervades his life. Even joy is diminished in the absence of relationships. Happiness is not merely an internal state, it is amplified and enriched when shared with others. The thrill of a personal achievement, the beauty of a sunset, or the humor in a joke all take on greater meaning when experienced in the presence of someone else. For the lonely man, these moments of joy are fleeting and incomplete. Without someone to share them with, they can feel hollow, as though the fullness of life is just out of reach. Perhaps most profoundly, the lack of relationships denies a person the opportunity to be truly known. To be known is to be seen and understood for who we are, with all our complexities, contradictions, and imperfections. It is a deeply validating experience, one that reminds us that we matter and that our existence has significance. Relationships provide the space for this mutual knowing, where we not only reveal ourselves but also come to understand others in return. For the man without friends or family, this experience of being known is absent. His life becomes a solitary endeavor, one in which his thoughts, feelings, and experiences remain unshared and unacknowledged. Ultimately, the absence of relationships strips life of its depth and texture. It reduces existence to a series of tasks and routines, devoid of the richness that comes from connection. The lonely man may survive, but he does not thrive. His life lacks the narrative threads that weave together a sense of legacy, belonging, and meaning. It is a life lived in isolation, not just from others, but from the very essence of what it means to be human. Without relationships, he is left adrift, yearning for a sense of purpose and connection that can only be found through the bonds we create with others. In the end, a life without relationships, without friends, family, or meaningful connection is a life stripped of its essence. It is a life marked by isolation, where vulnerability is feared, purpose is elusive, and the profound sense of belonging that anchors us to the world is absent. The lonely man, whether by choice or circumstance, denies himself the greatest joys and challenges of human existence, the give and take of love, the growth that comes from shared struggles, and the legacy built through meaningful bonds. While independence and self-reliance have their virtues, they cannot replace the depth, richness, and fulfillment that come from opening ourselves to others. The truth is, no man can thrive alone. Our stories gain meaning through their interweaving with others, and our lives find purpose in the connections we nurture. To live fully, we must embrace vulnerability, confront the discomfort of trust, and seek relationships not only for what they give us, but for how they allow us to give in return. Because in the end, it is the bonds we create, the people we love, and the lives we touch that leave the most enduring mark. A lonely man can survive, but it is only in connection that he can truly live. Let us not forget this timeless truth as we navigate our own paths and seek to help others find theirs.